Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our January Digital Government Update call. It's an absolute pleasure to be doing one of these calls with you again in 2021. It's been a little while since we last touched base. I understand that we have a number of new participants here today. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jamie Boyd. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for the Government of BC. I'm very pleased to be providing a little bit of an update, as usual, on what's going on with digital government, some highlights from last year, and then I'm going to try to get through that fairly quickly because we have a wonderful guest joining us today from the UK, and I'm very excited to introduce him to you. So our goals today are to provide our regular update, some reflections from 2020. In our December call, we talked a lot about the new mandate letter priorities, and so I'd like to highlight some new opportunities for us in 2021, and then we'll get right into our guest speaker. As a reminder, for those of you who perhaps have not been joining these calls, we have our digital framework here in BC that we're continuing to implement. You can find more information on digital.gov.bc.ca. And as many of you will know, we have 4 big priority pillars. The first is obviously services to citizens. That's why government exists, and we're looking to use digital tools to provide easy, accessible services to all British Columbians. We have our priority around data and information, made all the more important given the new mandate letter priorities. It focuses around providing accessible, reliable data that we can use to provide great services. We've got our commitments around being digital inside, so empowering public servants like yourselves with modern processes and tools. And finally, we've got our work around being connected outside, so building with and for the people we serve. We've made a lot of progress over the past year. One of the wonderful things about taking holidays is that we finally get to take time to really reflect on some of the big wins and some of the bigger challenges that we've addressed. And for me, one of the highlights from 2020 was absolutely our digital principles. So I would really encourage anybody who's doing presentations, who's reaching out to stakeholders or partners, to really use these as guiding principles for the way that we design and deliver our services. They're just such powerful commitments in there, and ways of thinking around, building ethically, building in the open, working in the historical context with respect for that historical and cultural context. So I would really encourage everybody to get familiar with the digital principles. So a few highlights for me from 2020. These are things that I was able to reflect on as I was sitting there drinking my eggnog. I'm just so proud of the incredible work that's happened across government in 2020. And so much happened, it's sometimes a bit of a blur. But first and foremost, I think it was just thrilling to see the extent to which our COVID response was digitally enabled, and it really did include participation from across government. I know that many of the digital teams that provided COVID response and services are represented on the call today. So just a profound thank you for the incredible leadership that you showed here. When we talk about digital government, not so long ago, I remember having conversations about how digital is about getting rid of the fax machines. And now in a post-pandemic world, or what will hopefully soon be a post-pandemic world, we can now point to a very different set of examples of what digital excellence looks like. For me, it's things like BC's COVID-19 self-assessment app that we were able to stand up very quickly. The code was put on GitHub right away. The chatbot that was launched initially through the Center for Disease Control and then eventually on a government-wide basis. That was an AI-powered chatbot that was stood up very quickly. The Supply Hub, Emergency Management BC created the COVID-19 Supply Hub to help facilitate access to personal protective equipment. And that was stood up in collaboration with partners like the Digital Technology Supercluster. That was stood up in just 7 days. Right. And so that kind of that very agile approach where we're focusing on providing excellence in service delivery is something that we can point to very, very decisively now. There were lots of other highlights for me. I was thrilled to see such great progress on clarifying our policies and standards. I know that often digital or IMIT standards can be very challenging to navigate. I think we've made good progress in clarifying some of those things. We've also increased capacity for digital services across government. Some of the examples of that for me, within my team, we've got our new digital support team, which I'm thrilled to see. There's also been good progress through the digital marketplace. So for those who perhaps don't know it would be worth checking out. And that involves a couple of very innovative procurement programs. So for example, Sprint with Us and Code with Us. So those initiatives have led to over $15 million worth of opportunities on the market so far. So really great ways of supplementing our internal capacity. And then, of course, there was good progress on new tools. So Ministerial Order 85, some of the initiatives to bring in modern cloud computing, all of those I think are very positive. And then the efforts across government to update our approach to hosting and application development. And then finally, the work on digital ID and digital trust has just been so exciting. For me, these are the backbone of many of our digital services. And I think it's been very exciting to see things like verified by video for the BC Services Card and just really great progress on the digital ID front, and seeing that being built into more and more of our services. That said, we have a lot of work to do in 2021. If you feel like getting inspired around the relevance of digital government, take a look at the new mandate letters. One of the priorities for me from a digital perspective is using those new tools that we've been working with to support mandate commitments. There are a number of commitments in those mandate letters around data. So lots of efforts around open data, data privacy and security, supporting anti-racism initiatives, taking an evidence-based approach to policy development. So there's really going to continue to be a strong emphasis on the use of data. And I think from our perspective, it's exciting to see digital teams equipped to leverage those commitments to really move on providing great services. And then a number of other priorities. I'm keen to work with teams across government to continue to support that culture of innovation, continuing to implement the digital principles. There's going to be a lot more work around modernizing our IMIT operating model. That's work that we've discussed on these calls in the past, and then continuing to embrace some of those new tools that are becoming available. So lots of work. I'm extremely excited to work with you all on this and continue to take a government-wide approach. So that's all I'll do on our updates because I want to leave lots of time for our guest. So I am absolutely thrilled to introduce to you our guest speaker today, the Right Honourable Lord Francis Maude. Francis is joining us today from the UK, where he served in the House of Commons for many years, including as a senior cabinet minister. And Francis was responsible for creating the world-leading government digital service, as well as gov.uk, which set a bit of a precedent for other governments around the world in terms of centralizing access to government services. So without more of an introduction, welcome, Francis.
Thank you. Really good to be with you, Jamie, and your team.
So I'm going to jump right in because we're all very eager to get some insight from your lessons and whatnot. So let's start with the history. I know that you were involved right at the very beginning, and the UK was a very early mover globally on digital government. So could you tell us a little bit about how the government digital service started? What was the thinking initially, and what led to all those investments?
Well, we were making it up as we went along. I have no kind of background in technology. We came into government in 2010. We had a big fiscal crisis, budget deficit of 11% of GDP. We had to save money, but at the same time, we had appalling record in government IT. We had what was thought to be the most expensive government IT in the world per capita of the population. And we had a litany of terrible kind of government IT car crashes. So we had to do things differently, and we needed to save money, and we had set ourselves a commitment of being the most digital government in the world, which seemed a pretty steep challenge to give ourselves. We got started. I mean, the first thing I did was I engaged Martha Lane Fox, who was one of the sort of heroes of the dot-com boom, co-founded lastminute.com. And Martha had been appointed by the previous government as the government's digital champion. I kept her on and asked her to do a very quick review, telling us how we should set about it. She said two things. You need to have a policy of digital by default. If it can be done online, it should be done only online. And the second thing is you need to find the best person there is to be the government's chief digital officer. So I said, okay, find him or her. She came back 2 weeks later and said he's called Mike Bracken. I persuaded Mike to join the civil service as effectively chief digital officer. And the rest is history, and we made it up from there.
That's fantastic. Were you successful? Cutting straight to the jugular, what was the impact of all these changes? I think many of us sort of would consider a lot of the highlights of the UK's investments as being a reduction in the cost of transactions. Would that be your highlight? What was the real impact for you?
Wow. I mean, this was what I was doing was running a huge program of cost reduction. Because when a program of fiscal consolidation, what can you do? You can put taxes up, you can cut welfare payments, you can cut services. But actually what a government should do, first of all, is cut its own costs, its overhead running costs. And we took out in the space of 5 years over £52 billion from the running costs, effectively from the running costs of government. The digital transformation program was one of the contributions to that. And so this was a big reform program, and so were we successful? Pretty successful. I mean, the UN in 2016 ranked the UK best in the world for e-government. That didn't happen spontaneously. I mean, it didn't. And I got given lots of credit for it, but actually, we just had a fantastic team in GDS. And what you have to do is it has to be led from the center of government, absolutely. And we developed it not just in digital and IT, but we looked at all of the kind of cross-cutting functions that run across a government, so procurement, financial management, real estate, major projects, all of these things, which are recognizably the same discipline, the same technical function wherever you find them. They have specialisms within it. And we said, actually, most governments operate the silo model. You just look at the verticals. We said we're going to look at the horizontals as well. And in the functional model, you expect these functions to be strongly led from the center of government. And you need three elements. You need a leader who has to have technical credibility and authority. You need to have a hard core of technical capability at the center of government, and you need to have the mandate. And without the right mandate, you won't get or keep the right leader. Without the right leader, you won't get or keep the right capability. And without the right capability at the center, then the mandate gets attacked and eroded, and the whole thing then goes into a downward spiral. And it's hard to make these things work because, in truth, there are plenty of people in the line ministries and departments and entities who don't want this kind of centrally led approach to succeed. And so unless you're strongly on the case, it gets sidetracked and eroded. And the key thing about the mandate is people sometimes say, well, are you saying everything has to be done at the center? Absolutely not. Most things get done in the line departments, ministries, agencies, etc. But it has to be led from the center, and you need to have controls from the center. And you were talking earlier about this thing about centralization. And the truth is, there's no perfect balance here. In good times, what always happens in any big complicated organization like a government or a big corporation or whatever it is, in the good times, you sort of give out more, you hold the reins more loosely, and the purse strings and all of that more loosely. In the difficult times, you pull them in. But you have to have that ability to pull it back in and to exercise control. And so we were absolutely militant about some common standards, open mandatory standards, especially on things like interoperability, where, we inherit, and frankly, there's a lot of these systems are still, legacy systems are still there in the UK. I've just finished doing a review of the functions, done a pro bono thing for the government. Massive, antique legacy systems, no interoperability, and because every bit of government was completely free to go off and do its own thing. And so you have duplication, reinventing the wheel, incompatibility, costs absolutely mount up. So the first thing we did was gov.uk, we had discovered there was something like 2,000 different government websites. And we kept finding more. I mean, the faster we closed them down, the more we found. And we replaced nearly all of them with gov.uk, open source code, used by other governments since, and improved, as happens with open source. And then moving on to transactions, and then moving into kind of what are the common services you can provide across government. So we discovered there were 132 different systems for making payments. We created gov.uk Pay, created gov.uk Notify, a single system also for making appointments, booking appointments, instead of it being constantly reinvented expensively. So, was it complete? But not by, nor will it ever be. Has it been sustained? Disappointing, I'd say, since. And most people would say that gov.uk is still terrific and did terrific work during, well, we've had the two things of Brexit, UK leaving EU, and then last 12 months, COVID. And gov.uk has been very impressive in dealing with those two very disruptive phenomena. But a lot of the digital transformation capability has been dispersed, sadly.
Okay, well, I've got so many questions about this, and I'm very keen to dig into some of the results from a citizen perspective, and not just the costs. Yeah. I can't help but ask you, why has there not been more progress? You talk about this backsliding. What are the barriers to change and adoption of digital processes?
Well, I mean, what's the problem with the silo model? The silo model, in the silo model, capability is dispersed. It's like in these horizontal functions, it's sliced up and dispersed into all the silos. And you cannot possibly have a hard core of top-end capability. Lead the function strongly from the center, and you will be able to attract in top-end capability and skills and experience, and that then permeates through the whole system. But in the silo model, the line entities are run by barons, and the baroners reassert themselves. If you're not kind of constantly on the case, then you find that the centrifugal forces start to operate, and the mandate gets eroded. The capability at the center is what I described, this downward spiral. You lose the mandate gets weakened, you lose the leader, the capability disperses. And you've had some support from Public Digital, I know, my friends at Public Digital, who are great. I mean, but that's the core of the team who were Government Digital Service. They all went because they didn't see that they were getting the political support to hold at bay those centrifugal forces, and so the line entities were reasserting themselves, and it all goes a bit downhill from there.
So we do have a question from one of our participants, Rulin from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and Rulin is asking about the ideal governance setup for digital change. To what extent, in an ideal world, would these kinds of mechanisms be centralized or decentralized? Would there be a centralized pot of funding that ministries would apply to access? Or would there be dispersed funding? What if you were to design a government from scratch that were to be as open to innovation and digital change as possible? What might that look like?
Well, I think you have to have a very strong mandate for the centre, and it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I say again, it isn't you. It isn't that you try and do everything at the centre. You don't, absolutely not, nor could you possibly. But you must have a strong mandate, which is strong powers. I mean, and it's not a substitute for taking people with you and creating goodwill and getting buy-in in the line entities. That's really important. That's where the leadership from the centre becomes so important. And obviously, you want, as much as possible, you want things to be done in the line entities. But there's the governments always like to have everything perfectly organized and a lovely organogram and everything written down and a perfect chart of how things are laid out. And real life isn't like that, because, I mean, in reality, at the center of government, you will know that there are some places in the different line entities around the government where the capability is stronger. And then you will be at the center, and the minister at the center will be much more relaxed about, allowing that all to go on and supporting it to go on without intervention. But that won't always be the case, and so you need to have the ability then to pull back control if the wrong things are being done. One of the things we had was some spend controls. I put in place spend controls very early on, within weeks of us coming into government. And that enabled us to stop the wrong thing being done. To begin with, we didn't have the capability to tell them what the right thing was, but we were good enough to recognize what was the wrong thing. And then as we built up GDS, we were then able to say, no, we're not going to let you do this, but we will help you do the right thing. And that's so the governance, I think you have to be quite pragmatic in how you do it, but you must have the power. And I always have in mind when I'm talking about the functional model, of which digital is clearly a key function. And it's a bit like the old Theodore Roosevelt thing: speak softly, carry a big stick. And the speak softly, persuade, take people with you, get buy-in. Inspire, lead, convince, but the big stick is the mandate, because that's what enables you from the center to get people's attention. And one of the things about the functional model, two things I would pick out in terms of how the governance worked and how the real life reactions to it were. Everyone said all these ministers are going to hate it. The ministers didn't, actually. Ministers were fine with it, because actually, if you're a minister, all you want it to work. You want it to be effective, and you don't frankly care whether it's being done by a completely autonomous unit in your own ministry or whether it's being led and supported from the centre. But very senior civil servants did, some of them, not all of them, but quite a lot of them, did resist it, and they resisted the incursion into what they regarded as their autonomy and sovereignty. The other part of it was we expected the heads of these functions in the line ministries also to resist it, and the best of them didn't, because the best of them found it was an empowering thing. They found that actually, because if you're the head of digital in a ministry and you're or head of procurement or whatever it might be, and your only reporting line is upwards to the head of the ministry, then actually you've got nowhere to turn if you're being put under pressure to do something that you don't think in your professional judgment is the right thing to do. Create the functional model with this reporting line into the head of the function at the center, and you give the heads of the functions in the line entities, you give them more clout and more ability to resist being pushed to do the wrong thing. Because sometimes, a minister or in our system, the permanent secretary, they're insisting on things being done very quickly often. And actually your professional judgment says, actually, if you do it that quickly, it's going to go wrong. If you do it in that way, it's going to go wrong. There's a better way to do it. And the functional model empowers the heads of the functions in the line entities.
Okay, so now I have a bit of a technical question then for you to dig down, and this is another audience question from Alex, and it's all very well to be saying, oh, we're going to empower these line ministries and whatnot, but then it would seem that there's often an argument that software cannot be simply adopted by a government as a whole. And so earlier you talked about the payment mechanisms or the appointment booking mechanisms. How did you address this perception of the incompatibility of software tools between ministries? Was there something that you were able to do to promote the adoption of common services?
Well, I mean, it's a big question, and we scratched the surface in all of this. And as I said, there are still a horrendous amount of anti-legacy systems in the UK government. Some going back to the 1960s. I mean, with software languages that nobody uses anymore, and they're fantastically expensive to keep going, but they are mission critical for some things that the government does, and they need to be sorted out, and that's a big priority, but it's tough to do, very difficult to do. So how do you? Well, I mean, part of it is the negative control, the ability to stop people doing their own thing. So identity assurance. We found, and we found different ministries wanting to go ahead and do their own thing. We just stopped them and said, no, we're not going to let you do that because actually there needs to be a single one. And that's how why you need those controls, why you need that mandate, and the negative power is actually more important than the sort of positive power to direct, because that's how you get the attention.
That's wonderful advice. We're almost at time, and so I'd like to invite you to close this off with some advice. Knowing that many of our participants are people who build digital services for the 5 million people of British Columbia, if you were to do this all again, if you were in my role, if you were on one of those digital teams, what would be your advice for British Columbia, for our digital teams?
Well, first thing is to wish you all very good fortune in what you do. It's incredibly important. Next thing is what I would have done differently. I would have done it quicker, but we were kind of feeling our way into it. And so, as I said at the beginning, we were making it. There was no textbook at that stage. We were making it up as we went along. I do it more quickly. Third is be confident about what you're doing. You are what you are doing is empowering citizens, liberating citizens, and getting government to align itself, configure itself around the needs of the user. If I do a slide presentation on what we did, I always have this picture of a window in the GDS office, which overlooked one of the metro underground stations in London. And very busy, people going in and out all the time. And what the guys did was they blanked the window out with brown paper and cut a little hole in it, just at the level where, while you're standing by it, all you saw was people going in and out of the station. And they just wrote users with an arrow. Just a constant reminder. This is about users. Governments typically are configured around, we expect citizens and businesses, anyone who interacts with the government, to adapt to how government happens to be organized, which, as we all know, is a completely historical accident. And a lot of it configured around buildings, physical infrastructure, which is, as we know over this last 12 months, is increasingly irrelevant. And what digital does is require government's processes and government activities to be reconfigured, redesigned relentlessly around the user. And that was the thing we did with gov.uk. We simply said, we're not going to let every ministry have its own website. One website, because people don't give a monkey's toss whether something is done by one ministry or another. They just want to know, where do I get the information? Where do I get done what I need to get done? And so relentless focus on user need, citizen need, and don't take no for an answer.
What a note to end on. Francis, thank you so much for so generously sharing your time and your insights and for inspiring us. So I think with that, we'll wrap it up. On behalf of the many public servants across BC that are working to build better digital services, a huge thank you.
Thank you. It's been good fun.
All right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next month.